Learning arpeggios can give you a whole new way to approach playing chords on guitar. But oftentimes when we learn arpeggio shapes and patterns, much like scales, we tend to skip the part where we're supposed to actually put them to use. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you a simple approach to playing arpeggios that you can use right away. It's going to immediately add musical maturity to your soloing and get your foot in the door on how to play over chord changes. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 4 arpeggios that represent 4 chords being played in a progression. And we're going to keep this specific to a backing track that you can find on the Guitar Mastery Method YouTube channel. So if you search a playlist for our backing tracks, you're going to find one called Rock Ballad in D, and that's the one that we're going to be using for this lesson. So if you don't already know, what an arpeggio is literally a broken up chord. So if you take a chord and then just play its individual notes one at a time, that's essentially playing an arpeggio. All right, now let's learn these 4 arpeggio shapes. They're going to represent, like I said, the 4 chords in the progression. So starting with a D major arpeggio, looks like this. Next is an E minor arpeggio. Then a G major arpeggio. And then an A major arpeggio. So there's a reason that I've selected these specific patterns of the arpeggios to be used in this lesson. Because what we're actually going to do is we're going to learn these arpeggios, learn how to place them properly when we're soloing over the chord progression in the backing track. But we're also going to be able to weave them all together with a scale. Because if you're just arpeggiating through chords, I mean, that's fine. But if you want to find a good place to add some melody to it, that's where you can combine using a scale. Now, each of these arpeggio patterns may seem a little awkward, especially that first one. And there's kind of a reason for that. So I'm advocating for using these shapes of the arpeggios because what I don't want for you is to get caught in that same trap that happens with scales, where you learn a pattern and then you just play it up and down, right? So take, for example, the G major arpeggio here. If you learn that, I don't want you to only play it where you're just, sweeping it up and down. Right? Because that would technically work if there is, a G major chord being played in a progression and then you just played a G major arpeggio. That would technically be correct, but I don't want you to pigeonhole yourself into that same trap with scales, like I said. So when you're learning these arpeggio shapes, it's mainly to just give you target notes. That's what I really want you to keep in mind. Because when you're playing over chord changes, the whole goal is to highlight chords that are being played in a progression in real time, right? So if you're, hearing a G chord, then an E minor chord, then a D chord, you want to be playing the notes in the G chord, the E minor chord, and the D chord at the right time when they appear in the progression. So to give you an example of that, I'm going to throw on that backing track and I'm just going to play through the arpeggios so you can see how they highlight the chords. So that was just to show you if I were to use arpeggios to toe the line with the chords that are being played in the progression, it'll pretty much sound correct every time. But again, like I said before, we don't want to fall into that trap of just ascending and descending and any kind of variation of that with the arpeggios, because what they really should be are target notes. So what we're going to do now is we're going to learn a scale that's going to perfectly weave together. You can think of it like the glue that'll kind of keep all these arpeggio shapes sort of in one neighborhood. And what it's going to do is it's going to give us some melodic options so we can play over the chord changes and also think in terms of melody that we can get from the individual scale. And the scale we're going to learn is a D major pentatonic scale, but we're going to learn it in what we call the G+3 pattern. So I'll show you the G pattern of the scale first and then the +3 notes. Here we go. And here are the additional notes right here. So we have this G pentatonic pattern, and it's called that because it resembles a G chord, right? The physical shape actually makes up a G chord, but as far as the tonality, we are playing in D major. So this is the D major pentatonic scale, just in the G pattern, +3 with those 3 additional notes. So with this scale, we can do stuff like this. Okay, so between that scale and those arpeggios, we got a whole lot to work with to make some great music. So this backing track has multiple parts to it where the chord progression is different. So we're gonna start with the very first part, which pretty much starts at the top. We begin with a G major arpeggio. And then right after that, we have E minor. And then we have a D major chord for 2 bars after that. So we have our D major arpeggio to give us all the notes to work with, which actually, if you take a look at the D major arpeggio, it perfectly overlaps the D major pentatonic scale. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. And you'll notice 2 other arpeggios fall right in that same neighborhood, like the G major arpeggio is right here. And then we can, just go right into D major pentatonic, concluding that shape, just to show you that it's all right there. Same thing with the E minor arpeggio. So you can hear the tonalities changing. It's like you can hear the chords. You can hear the tonality of the chords without the backing track. That's the whole thing about using notes in a chord to highlight the chord that you're playing over. That essentially is playing over chord changes. And then of course with that A major arpeggio, that's just our one outlier that just takes the G major arpeggio shape, right? And moves it up 2 frets, 1, 2. And then it's right here where the +3 in the G+3 pattern is. So we got everything that we need and everything is nicely contained within this little chunk of the fretboard. Oh, and by the way, if you're getting value out of this lesson, do me a favor, hit that like button and consider subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. We've been working hard on these lessons for you and we got a whole lot more coming your way, so I'd love for you to be the first to know when they're ready. All right, thanks in advance. Let's get back to it. Okay, so we have all the tools we need. We have the scale shape, we have the arpeggios. Now what? Well, first we want to keep in mind the chords and the progression we're playing over. So remember, in the very first part of the backing track, we have a G chord, an E minor chord, and then we have a D chord appearing twice. And then that's looped however many times until it goes into the next part. So armed with that intel, we know we have G, E minor, and then D twice. So we have the G major arpeggio. And then for E minor, we have the E minor arpeggio. And then for D, we have the D major arpeggio. Now the thing is, when we're playing over chord changes, you got to anticipate when the change is going to happen, right? You don't want to be caught playing the notes in a chord over the wrong chord, because then you really run the risk of it sounding dissonant and not really working. So don't play the entire shape. When we're starting with that first chord in the progression, don't do this, right? You don't have to. Instead, just take a handful of notes, like take the first few notes, for example, and it lands us right there in the D major pentatonic. So we can do something like that. Just use these notes as target notes, so you don't have to use them all at once. So just take a fragment of those arpeggios and play through them over the chord changes, and then have some simple melodies by way of the D major pentatonic scale to give you something to weave them together. So use what I just did there as a benchmark for yourself. Start slow and simple. Just work with a few notes in each arpeggio at a time and just anticipate those changes, right? Because we have that G chord, then that E minor chord, and that D chord occurring twice. And of course, when we go into the next part of the backing track, the chord progression is going to change. So we got to anticipate that too. And when that next part hits, these are going to be the chords. E minor, and then A. And then we have 2 bars of D. Okay, so the A chord has now made an appearance, right? So we start with E minor. And again, start with just a handful of notes, And then when it comes time to play over the A chord, you can do the same thing, just fulfilling the shape of the A major arpeggio, and then bring it on back down to the D chord. And of course, throw in some major pentatonic. See, you can hear that I'm playing over the chord changes, but not doing anything fancy, just starting off real simple, keeping in mind, right, you gotta actively listen while you're doing this, because that's the thing with playing over chord changes. It does require more brain power, because it's not like you're just getting lost in a one-size-fits-all scale. We do have that with the major pentatonic, but if we want to play over chord changes, we have to think about the chords being played, and we have to remember to target the notes in the respective chord. Now in the beginning, this is going to take some work, but it's okay. You can sit and listen to the backing track over and over again, take note of when the chords change. In fact, there's going to be a display, in the actual video on the YouTube channel when you're playing the backing track where it shows you the chords. So you at least have a visual aid there just to give you something to work with. So the third part of the backing track, we're just going to have two chords. We're going to have a G chord and an A chord, and I think that's going to happen 3 times. It's going to loop 3 times. So we got G. And remember, for A, it's literally the same exact finger pattern brought up 2 frets. That part in the backing track is going to be the perfect opportunity for you to practice moving this major arpeggio shape between the G and the A chords. And there it is. Those are the 3 chord progressions that are occurring in this backing track. We have the first progression, which is G, E minor, D, and D, then E minor, A, D, and D, and then just G and A. That last demonstration was to show you going through all 3 chord progressions, what it'll essentially look like playing those arpeggios by targeting the notes in the chord being played and weaving them all together with some melody from the major pentatonic scale. This is enough material to keep you going for hours, because now you've essentially been handed the keys on how to play over chord changes, just like that. So study the backing track, learn those changes, and take your time with applying the notes in those arpeggios. Totally fine to start small and simple and then work your way up from there. Now in this lesson, we covered soloing in a single key, but there are 11 other keys just waiting for you to play them. And if you're wanting to learn how to quickly find every single musical key on your fretboard, well, I got just the thing for you. Just so happens to be that free gift I owe you now that you've made it to the end of the lesson, and here it is. This bad boy is a free guide on how to instantly solo in any key. It's going to show you in record time how to find every musical key on your fretboard, and it's going to show you how to comfortably and confidently play in those keys no matter what they are. So to claim your copy, go ahead and click here or check the link in the description box. Arpeggios are useful for much more than just sweeping or arpeggiating chords for a ballad. You may not know this, but they're actually the entire foundation of the cage system. It's basically all arpeggios.